Yeah. All right, this is Corey S. with the Bull City Bulletin. It's July 2nd, 2014, and we've got a very special broadcast lined up in procession with our last interview with Dawood Bey regarding the Child Protective Services and the city government essentially intruding into his living space as a result of him having a live home birth. And this report generated a lot of interest in the website and seemed to strike a nerve with many people out there because we had several comments and different messages from folks who have also been victims of what seems to be a vast and very tragic trend at the Child Protective Services agency in our government. And one of the individuals who reached out, her name is Ruth Chichester, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and she actually founded a Facebook page for victims of social services. It's called Victims of Social Services Unite, and it was started in 2010 and now has, unfortunately, about 1,347 people who are contributing. And we exchanged emails. I asked her to write a short introduction, and she was willing to come on and talk about her history and her background with the Child Protective Services and what she's learned since having more than one of her children taken away from her. And so we're coming to you 2 days before Independence Day to have a very serious discussion about our independence and whether the city government really has any business being in our lives and essentially able to take away, in some cases, our children for completely unreasonable and, frankly, illegal reasons. So, Ruth, I appreciate you coming on. If you want to start off with just an introduction to yourself and how you have come to the conclusions that you've come to.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting. I just recalled that I started my page, Victims of Social Services Unite, on Independence Day in 2010. And that was kind of in response to recent events at that time. I had just had, the end of June that year, another social worker suddenly appearing at my door, wanting entry to my home without any warrant or lawful reason, and based on the false allegations of one individual who retaliated against me by contacting the department. And of course, as a citizen, and a strong citizen at that point, I said, no, you're not coming into my home, even though this person happened to have 2 cops behind her. It didn't matter to me. I, kept the door open only with the chain on and spoke to them through the door. But of course, without my knowledge or consent, they also whizzed right into the child care facility and took my children into private interviews and spoke to them without my consent or permission, or even without my knowledge. And as a result of my refusal of them opening my door, they did actually file a court case against me, which took 62 days for me to be notified. It's state law here in Virginia says that if they open a case, they have to resolve it in 45 days, or they have to give a reason why to extend it to 60 days. But they also have, they have specific time limits. Well, they went to the tail end of their time limit before they went into the courthouse with those papers. So, that began another, pardon my language, but another shitstorm of crapola from that setting and those people and the whole 9 yards. And of course, at that time, I had just begun to connect with a lot of other individuals on Facebook and through networking online and social media, who had also had their own nightmares with social services and CPS. What I discovered, interestingly, within the first year of my page and its growth, was that it's not just in the United States. This is a worldwide epidemic of essentially domestic terrorism. I like that term. That's what a guy named Carlos Morales, who posts on YouTube, who is a former social worker, calls it. He said this is legalized domestic terrorism in the United States today. And they use Nazi-level tactics. They can come into your home without consent or permission. Sometimes they'll storm your doors. There was one family I knew of in California where they actually did break down the door to get in to steal this man's 6 children, and he had it on tape. The example that we saw on the video with Daoud of protecting himself and his home and understanding his rights as a citizen of this country, the right to protect his family from unwanted visitors and intrusion, it stands right on the Constitution, right? The right to privacy. The sad fact is that most parents in our country today do not realize that they have the right to just say no. Everyone that I've spoken to in my community, and it's fairly small, but I've talked to a lot of young people, young in the terms that, you know, I'm in my 50s, and so young meaning in their 20s, new parents with young children. I said, what do you think you should do if a social worker shows up at your door? Oh, well, I have to let them in, right? No, you don't. And people don't understand that social workers act under their own policy, but policy is not the same as law.
Right.
And people don't read the law, or they understand the letter of the law to understand that they do have a right to refuse anything that a social worker wants to tell them to do or wants to come into their house without a warrant or legal documentation.
Right.
And
so you have police who enforce the politicians' policies.
Exactly.
But as you say, it's totally different than what's legal or even lawful. Lawful is probably a better way of describing it, because there's also a lot of legalese that gets written into these regulatory codes that give them the justification. But there's also a psychological component to it, you know, that people have to accept that there is some role for the government to do what they do, and so you see a lot of people resisting or at least thinking that we're not the empathic people and that we don't care to protect the children. And of course that's the cover story. That's what they don't understand. But it's quite a different thing when they, you know, the social workers showing up with police officers who happen to have guns at your door. I mean, that's a totally different thing. What do you say to those people who would, you know, without having any firsthand experience, say, well, you know, we need child protective services. We have to have something to protect the children. What would you say to them?
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. The problem that we have that goes on today is what people do not understand, the hidden agenda that CPS operates under. I just found it today online on YouTube. Molly McGrath, she's the director of Child Protective Services in Baltimore, Maryland. She gave an astounding TED Talk in February, and she discusses the fact that Child Protective Services is not a government agency out there to help people. It is an industry. And the only way that this industry can continue to function is if, number one, the people in the business of protecting can soothe their egos by helping, or what they feel like they're helping, by taking children into care. And then the second thing is that this industry only profits, and they profit a big time from federal funding if they take children into care. So if they remove children from their home of origin for whatever reason, and they can find any reason, they can make up stuff and put those children into foster care, that reaps a huge profit from federal funding for the agencies at hand. So, of course, when these profits began to be implemented, it was 1998, 1997 it began with what they call Title 4D funding. And at the time, the government was kind of at their wits' end. They said, well, we've got all these kids, they're in foster care, and they've been languished away in foster care for years and years and years. We want to do what can we do to get these kids a forever home, to help them get out of the foster care system and be adopted. So they decided to incentivize, to give incentives to the agencies for every child adopted out of foster care. So each agency gets a bonus of approximately $4,000 to $10,000 for every child that's adopted into a permanent home or adopted by a foster care provider. So of course now they have turned what should have been an industry that protects children, well, not even an industry, but should have been an agency that is there to help people, into an industry that essentially traffics children. And some agencies have corrupted to the degree that they seek out, they'll target poor families, they'll target disabled parents, they'll target single parents especially. They'll target the poor, the disenfranchised, the people that they know do not have the ability and the resources to fight back. And they will steal their children with the legal auspices of their policies, and like you spoke about with the blanket term neglect, 90% of cases are eventually classified as neglect cases.
I knew it.
And that neglect can encompass all kinds of things. Neglect can encompass, in my case, I had, a pile of laundry in the living room and a pile of laundry on the bed in the bedroom. Clean laundry. We just hadn't folded it and put it away. I had a sink full of dirty dishes. I had pets, so I had a pee pad on the floor with pet feces. Right? So my home was not pristine.
Sounds like a normal house.
Exactly. Any household with children is obviously not going to have a pristine home. Well, they can encompass neglect in that the home was not clean or well ordered, or if you happen to have a lot of clutter. I had the social.
Well, hey, someone could trip over those clothes.
Exactly.
You're endangering the children.
We're endangering our children.
You don't care about the children. Worker.
She walked in the door to my home. At the time, I had 3 almost floor-to-ceiling bookshelves full of books. I think I had counted at that point over 10,000 volumes. Hey, I like books. And she, in a very critical, condescending way, said, "Oh, you have a lot of books." As if that was some terrible thing. I'm a disorganized parent who collects things.
Who reads?
Has clutter, right? And later on, used that in her report to say that that justified a 90-minute eval that I had, where the doctor said that I had obsessive compulsive disorder.
Wow.
Never mind the fact that every subsequent doctor that I went to said, "You do not have OCD, and I can't prescribe you medication because you don't have OCD." Even the foremost expert in the state who was conducting research on OCD said, "You do not have OCD." But
Unbelievable.
I was said, it was said that I did, and it became part of a court record, and on and on. And that's the thing, is that they can make up stuff as they go along. It's highly subjective. It's incredibly opinionated. So depending on how the social worker functions, number one, depending on how the social worker it stands in her hierarchy within her own agency, and depending on how the agency has come down and said, "Well, we have a quota to meet this month. You got to get so many kids into foster care so we can make X amount of dollars." All of these factors, this is the hidden factors that parents don't realize. So here we have these people coming to our door. They're in a position which we assume is a position of trust, although we might not necessarily trust them. Of course, we've always been brought up, we've been well indoctrinated by our country to believe that people who are in the government are supposed to be there to help us, or that the police are there to protect us. But next thing you know, they come with the police. The police are not acting under law. The police are acting under what is called color of law. When I understood this concept, it was like, whew, my head just blew up. When you realize that there's law, and there's somebody who has a uniform and a badge doing something that you think is lawful, but it's really only under the color of the law. Their outward appearance appears legal, but their actions are not.
Right.
And technically there are federal guidelines for every single officer of the law in this country that they must act under and not do things that are unlawful under color of law simply because they have a uniform and a badge and a gun. And that in itself, an infringement upon a color of law infraction is a federal offense that we can essentially write up and send a federal lawsuit to the American government. The federal
now, is that something that you employed to win the battles that you did? Because you did mention in your introduction that you had a string of victories. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how people can resist successfully?
I do have to go back to the beginning. The beginning when I didn't know any better. 1997. Actually, it began in the early 90s. I had a daughter that was about 2.5 years old, and I was pregnant with the second child. Not the same dad. And that man systematically wanted to use this government, he used CPS to abuse me, basically, because he could not control me. When I tried to disengage myself from that relationship, the next thing you know, I had a social worker at my door. So the first visit happened shortly before my second child was born in 1990. About a month before, I had a social worker come to my door and say that someone had anonymously reported that I was engaging in prostitution because I lived about a block off of East Colfax in Denver, which was known for that in that area, and allowing my older daughter to play in the cat box with cat feces.
Wow.
Odd, weird stuff.
Anonymous, by the way.
Anonymous, but I knew who it was, and I said to the worker, I know who contacted you, and here's the reason why.
But at that time, did you know before then that someone could just make an anonymous tip and it actually be followed through with?
To a certain degree, but it had never personally affected me. I spoke very candidly with the worker at the time. He eventually, nothing came of that. That was considered unfounded. But it began a string of constant calling. This man called CPS every 90 days for 4 years so that he could gain control of our children. And meanwhile, we had an on-again, off-again thing that was just, I was not in a healthy place, let's put it that way. And we had a son. And he upped the ante. He worked very hard after the son was born to get control of both the son and the daughter. So by 1994 and 95, he finally managed to, at the time I didn't really know what hit me. It went from bad to worse to the worst nightmare I'd ever experienced within about a year and a half, and I felt like somebody just on the tracks with a train headed your way. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight it. I didn't know who to talk to. The first dependency neglect case that went to court, the attorney said to me, just admit and it'll all go away in about 6 months. So cooperate with them fully and everything will be fine. That was the worst advice I'd ever received in my whole entire life. And the worst advice that I followed. Because, okay, I didn't know any better. I said, okay, I'll go to court. I'll admit to dependency and neglect of my children. I did not know the full extent of what that meant. And no one informed me of my rights. No one informed me that I had the right to just say no, or that I had the right to go to court, that I had a right to a full hearing and a jury trial.
Ruth, just to interject, is child court different than regular court?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Very different. These are the major flaws that we have in the juvenile court system. And I've said this often, I've written this in comments on articles. A criminal, the hardest, worst offending criminal in this country, has more rights in a criminal court than a parent facing a court action by CPS. Their rights are afforded more often than a parent in a CPS action. Parents in CPS actions are taken into a courtroom. They're not even given a hearing, first of all. They're taken into a little room. The social worker comes in and talks to them. The person that maybe the court has already appointed as a guardian ad litem to supposedly represent their children comes and talks to them. Maybe a court-appointed attorney it comes to talk to them. But in the state of Mississippi, I just found out there is no legal, there's no law that allows for representation for parents in CPS cases in the state of Mississippi. The state of New Hampshire has also tried to do away with the cost of legal representation for parents in these cases. So here you have a person facing all this legal stuff with lifelong ramifications, with absolutely no knowledge prior to it, no understanding of what they're facing, and then you have these people who, they maybe think, well, maybe they're here to help me, so I'm just going to do what they tell me to do. Attorneys that are hired by the state to represent parents in cases, very, very rarely you can find an attorney who is willing to fight CPS for you. They will, across the board, just simply tell parents, there's no fighting this. There's nothing you can do but cooperate with them, do everything they tell you to do, and maybe you'll get your kids back. And most of the time, it is emotional blackmail. So you're sitting in a room, you're told, well, if you don't admit to what you've done, when you've done nothing wrong, here's what we're going to do. And then this most recent case that I had in 2010, that's exactly what they did. They came into the room and they said, if you don't admit to a DNN in the hearing that we're going to have here in a few minutes, then we're going to ask the court to take your kids and put them in foster care. We're going to seek a removal. So in order to keep my kids at home, because I know from all the study that I've done that foster care is more dangerous and more detrimental to children, then I went ahead and said, okay, I guess I'm going to have to admit, because my kids are not leaving my home. But
yeah, hey, I just want to interject here to your point. I did a little research myself, and here on Wikipedia,
sure.
There's the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect in 1998 reported 6 times as many children died in foster care than in the general public.
Exactly.
Here are the statistics, and I was pointing out before we started, you know, even if you agree with the concept that we need to take money from taxpayers to create basically what's a for-profit agency of the government, pseudo-agency of the government called Child Protective Services, they should at least be within the ballpark of statistical success relative to even the abusive parents. And here we see across the board a vast delta between the incidence of abuse between the CPS and parents. So even if you agree with this concept, what we have is not what they say that it is.
And,
exactly.
and this also translates into the natural childbirth with Dawood. He just wanted to have natural childbirth because the infant mortality rate here in North Carolina is one of the worst states in the country. So,
well, and on that note, the World Health Organization has already published statistics. Out of 29 developed nations in the world, the United States stands at 28th in infant and mother mortality. So how many parents who are pregnant, who are going to have a baby, spend as much time looking up these things, reading these things, becoming as educated as Dawood did about how to have the healthiest pregnancy, the healthiest birth possible for him, his wife, and his child? Not very many. They also, that's the other aspect that I'm passionate about, is women making personal choices, informed choices in childbirth, which they're not afforded. And again, we lose our autonomy. We forget that we have the right to just say no. How many pregnant women have said, well, maybe the doctor will let me go full term before they induce me? What? Just say no to induction, you know, and they don't understand there's medical procedures that come into play, interventions. Once you have one procedure, it creates a snowball effect of other procedures, and our statistics are showing that children, babies, and mothers are not safer in a hospital setting. They really are not, and yet still we only have about 5% of births happening at home in this United States. Whereas
Well,
in other countries, like in Northern Europe, where they promote midwifery, they teach women to be midwives, and the government pays for midwifery service, they have about 89% of their children born at home in Northern Europe, in Denmark and Sweden. And huge difference, just a massive difference between the health of the mother and the health of the baby.
Well, again, we see it is a multifaceted issue. It's not just that there is ill-intending people within the bureaucracy of the CPS that's at play. There's also a huge medical component, as Eric pointed out last time, a massive pharmaceutical incentive,
Exactly.
not just within the CPS to prescribe drugs, but as well in the the allopathic medical industry, which is an industry just the same as the CPS.
Exactly, exactly. And what we don't understand is that these systems that have been put into place that influence us, that now can somehow govern our lives, are not necessarily the best thing for us. How many people sit down and do research into vaccinations, for example, or like Dawood did a research about the infant vaccines and what that entailed and what that consisted of. He did research on the vitamin K that's given to newborns when they're fresh out of the womb. And every procedure that was going to be inflicted upon his child in the hospital setting that he didn't necessarily agree with. And I like what he said. In order to avoid the chaos that would ensue if I said no to them in the hospital, we just made an informed and educated decision to have our baby at home.
It's like what you said. If you agree to one procedure, it just keeps tying into more and more procedures.
It creates more and more. And many women who are pregnant are never given the information such as if you have an epidural during labor, you are 50% more likely to end up having a cesarean section. Period. We have an overall national C-section rate in this country of 45%, and there's absolutely no valid reason for that. None at all.
That's
because
incredible.
The incidences of real problems that arise that require a C-section is about 2 to 3%. And then the other issue that we have is that if once you have a C-section, you cannot go to any hospital in this country today and have a vaginal birth after C-section. I got in on the tail end of that. I was able to have my son after I had a cesarean with twins, and they were in the wrong position, and I understood that there was really no way to naturally give birth to them. At the time, at least, I thought I did, but I have since seen some videos about that too. But anyway, I agreed to a C-section with the twins, and a year and a half later, I had my son, and I insisted. And every week, I had to tell the old school doctor, no, I'm not scheduling a repeat cesarean. I'm going to have a vaginal birth. And he gave me a study to read, and I said, okay. And he said, well, you understand it's not in layman's terms. Yeah, fine, I can read medicalese. That's the thing. I have done my own studying. I've done my own reading. I've been proactive to get all the information that I possibly could get. And that is part of the problem inherent in the CPS success that CPS has, is that people have very little resources. They probably have a very limited education. If they graduated high school, it's probably, I think recent studies show that about 75% of high school graduates still are not fully English literate. They cannot read and write. They may have graduated and got a degree, but they still don't understand. So when you give them a piece of paper, especially written in legalese, they don't know. They have no comprehension.
Yeah, but Ruth, when you know something, when you develop a personal knowledge, and then you assert yourself within the current environment that we live in,
right,
you tend to get a lot of vitriol from people. For example, you mentioned vaccines and vitamin K. I've even seen some comments around the web in regards to our posting. Oh, so you're one of those crazy anti-vaxxers, or, oh, you're against vaccinations. Even though we never said that, that was never claimed by us. We never told anybody they couldn't get a vaccination. You just make your own personal decision not to vaccinate your child. Then they see that as an affront to them, because then your diseased child might infect them, who's protected by these vaccinations. Even if that's true, can you talk about the vitriol and the response that people have expressed as a result of your fan page and your resistance to the CPS?
Well, fortunately, I have not seen it on my fan page, and I feel very blessed because I have seen a lot of other groups that seem to be functioning pretty well on Facebook, had an agenda, hope to go far, to make a difference, and suddenly there's all this infighting on Facebook and a lot of people posting a bunch of rumors and negativity, and the next thing you know, the whole thing dissolves. And I don't fully understand the dynamic behind that. I'm still working on that. But
It could be COINTELPRO. It just could be our natural mental illness.
it could be, or in some cases, I think maybe there might be CPS trolls out there who actually kind of instigate themselves into that, and they begin to make it. It's just like the what is it? A house divided cannot stand.
That's right.
So they know we might make some headway if we all got together and got action, but that we can't act if we're all individuals out here just speaking out. When I faced my first situation, I was a good parent. Everybody called me a good parent. I was PTA president. I was active in the school. I was active in the daycare. Everyone that I knew thought that I was a good parent. And when CPS came in and I lost all my children and I was alone for about a year and a half with nothing and no children and totally grief-stricken, my friends just drifted away. And no one called and no one spoke to me. And one day I kind of realized why. A lot of my friends were single moms like myself, and they thought, wow, if this terrible thing can happen to Ruth, maybe it could happen to me. So they didn't know what to say, first of all, and secondly, they were kind of scared to be involved. And the other aspect was when I did speak out about it and say, look, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a horrible parent. I didn't abuse my children. I didn't hurt them in any way. People would look at you and their eyes would glaze over because their assumptions, their myths about this is that Child Protective Services is there to protect kids from bad parents. So they don't just take kids away from you for no reason at all. So you must have done something horrible, and you're just not telling us. So that we always assume the worst about the person rather than want to assume the worst about our agencies that are there, because our dynamic, our conceptualization is that we are supposed to trust them. And they don't just do this out of, and I have seen numerous comments online in the same effect. You can't just say they don't come in and take kids away from parents who haven't done anything wrong. There must be more to the story. You read an article online, and the sad fact is that when the media does report on situations like that, like say a parent lived in a very, very rundown house, had no resources, no finances to fix up the house. It was inundated with pestilence and leaking roofs and mold and all that, and maybe the house was dirty or cluttered. But what you get in a report, the media comes in, removal, 5 children from a house infested with vermin, right? You get all the worst of the worst, and we don't see the whole picture. We're never even given the whole picture. And then, of course, we want to make the assumption that this is a terrible, neglectful parent who couldn't even clean up their house for the health of their children and whatever. And, it's not mentioned maybe they're a single parent working 3 jobs to pay the bills because they're not getting a wage that they can live on, or a single parent left a child alone or left a child with somebody who was irresponsible. And then the child was abused or neglected. Yeah, and what we don't understand is the dynamic that went on there. This woman maybe saw every single person in town, called everybody in her little black book to get help to take care of her child that day so she could keep her job. And if she missed one more day of work, she was going to be fired. And, of course, she needed the income. So she leaves her kid with somebody who's not as responsible as she is even comfortable with, but she sees that she has no other options. And then, of course, something terrible happens.
Just to interject here, first of all, there's 2 things. Our society is completely addicted to the state to such a proportion. I only can give an analogy of like the Matrix.
Right, exactly.
It's really that bad with the programming.
You want the blue pill or the red pill?
Second of all, the state is absolutely decimating, exploiting the poor.
Exactly.
To incredible degree. We're imprisoning the poor. We're taking away their children. They're all going into the military.
Right.
It's atrocious stuff. which I don't think is by accident. I think.
Well, and Eric, it's happening in the military too. Military members are also more likely to lose custody of their children. There's a man right now, the story just came out and it was on ABC News last week. He is deployed in the Navy on a ship in the ocean, and yet a custody judge in some state, I forget which state, said if he doesn't show up for court, he's going to lose custody of his child when he can't physically be there because he's serving his country.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an outrage, but that's what's happening. Military members are losing their children as well, and they are also being targeted by CPS. And the poor, let's get on that subject. Thanks to the Republicans and Bush, and well, it started with Clinton, right? Welfare reform. We had this big, huge to-do, and it's still a constant thing. At the time, I also was studying about Nazi Germany and World War II, and went back to the very beginning and studied how the Nazi war machine and the Nazis were able to do what they did to the Jews, primarily because they instigated a campaign of selective propaganda to the Jewish population that began well before the war even started. So when they did come in and they stormed communities and they removed the Jews, and many Jews still, or many citizens still believe that the Jews were simply relocated for their safety because the public, there was such animosity towards them in the public.
Yeah,
all of that in the mindset.
The
Right.
propaganda, they do the
right.
propaganda before they actually do the action of what the propaganda is supposed to be.
Exactly.
So right now,
we have Fox News, we have propaganda, we have what's his face, Gingrich, who gets on national media and talks about somebody going to Hawaii with food stamps, right?
Right. I mean, let's just look back at our state of our species right now. Anybody can be a domestic terrorist.
Right.
Drug abuse has gone well. People are crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
So more justification for the police state. More justification for the CPS stuff. So it's working out beautifully because
yes.
Yeah. And so that's what we're doing here. We're trying to educate people.
I offended some people online and lost a whole group of people that I was communicating with at the time when I said that, though. But we're turning into a Nazi state.
Absolutely.
And we're allowing this propaganda, the media, to influence us. So if you sit around all day and watch Fox News and they talk about nothing but the Obama is the food stamp president, free phones that Obama let everybody have. We had that service before Obama became president. Come on, people. You know,
well,
but misuse of tax dollars, you know.
The mainstream media should be talking about the issue we're talking about right now.
Exactly.
Everyone should be extrapolating this idea, but it's completely hidden. It's completely ostracized.
Completely hidden.
And it could be actually evidence as someone who is a domestic terrorist.
Right, right. And then what we find out is that we are distracted with trivial. We're distracted with the trivial. We want to distract the citizens to be incensed about the government providing services to the poor, whether it be food stamps, housing, cash benefits, welfare, medical, whatever. And meanwhile, what we don't see is how our government allows major corporations to avoid paying 181 billion taxes a year by stashing their funds overseas.
Yep.
Right? So it's a well-oiled machine. Let's put it that way.
Once you start educating yourself like you do, when you start researching and seeing where the state meets the human species, where you get to see that, you see this incredible contradiction in every facet of the state.
Exactly.
And that place where the tire meets the road, no mainstream media talks about, and coincidentally, none of our society talks about, except all these independent media that are starting to come out. So just the fact that you see that no one's talking about where the tire meets the road should be a major warning that we are under some type of social engineering. And
we in the advocacy for this issue primarily, we do find that, you know, I personally kind of feel a small victory when something does get into the mainstream, Like we had a major network news report about the incidences of children in foster care given drugs. And they did a report out of Texas and found like 2 out of 3 foster children are medicated. Some as young as age 2 are given psychotropic medications.
Yep.
Sometimes 2 and 3 or 4 medications. And what they failed to say, but what is also in that hidden agenda, is that when a child is in foster care, the funding streams consist of a lot of different areas, but one of them is if they can document, even falsely document, that a child has specific medical or mental health needs, they get more money.
Right.
They not only get more money, but they can utilize more funding. And that's another aspect. Kids are taken from their parents who are poor for the blanket term of neglect, for example. Parent may be struggling, can't provide stable housing, for example. So the child is placed in the foster care home. That foster care home can not only draw cash benefits, but say they took the kid out of the parent's house because it was inadequate or the living conditions were dangerous. Like there was serious structural problems with the home, or there was a leaking roof and the parents could not afford to fix it. But the foster family, who might have the same problem, can draw on cash benefits from Title 4D funding to fix their housing issues, to create a stable, perfect living environment for this child because they happen to be in the foster care system. But they cannot also implement those funds and give those funds to biological families who have the same exact need.
It's incredible.
And that, to me, is the biggest issue right there. The kids are damaged. They're damaged by removing from a parent. Even a child who has been abused has loyalties, has emotional involvement, has love and connectedness with this person, even the person that might hurt them. And so placing them in another person's home with somebody, and then the social workers routinely will also engage in brainwashing, psychological abuse of the child.
Absolutely.
They tell the child, if you don't admit to all the terrible things that your parents did to you, you'll never see them again. Or they'll tell the child, your parents hate you. They don't want you. You need to bond with this person here who's now going to be your new mom.
Wow.
And kids are psychologically abused routinely. And of course, deep down, they want nothing more than to just go home.
So in actuality, those statistics that I showed are likely a lot better than it actually is. I mean, how do you even measure psychological abuse? I'm sure it's underreported.
You can't measure it. That's why I encourage you to find that video. It's Molly McGrath on. It's actually, I posted it to my page earlier today, so you can scroll down and look at my page and find it. The TED Talk she did in Baltimore, and she does talk about that. The emotional fallout that these children experience. It's just enormous, and we may have a system that thinks they're functioning to the degree that they have encouraged their own industry, and they have done that big magnanimous giver thing of protecting children from the terrible abuse. But what we ultimately find is children who are in foster care for any length of time are more likely to suicide. They don't succeed in life. Some are aged out of foster care at the age of 18, and nothing is provided for them. They have no one to fall back on. They've lost connection with their biological parents, and they're kicked out of their foster home as soon as they turn 18, and they have nothing. They have no resources, no one to take care of them, so they can end up homeless on the streets. They're more likely to end up in jail.
Yeah.
Girls are more likely to go into prostitution and end up pregnant.
You mentioned in your mail that your children were taken from you, and
Yes.
even though they're grown now, they're so alienated from you. Could you talk about maybe some discussions or something that you've had with them that kind of showed you how bad this does damage the connection?
Well, the problem is they're so alienated. They blocked me on Facebook. I may email them annually, like on their birthday, but they don't respond to me at all. In the years since, when the two younger children that were by the same man, he won custody of those kids. So he systematically implanted memories that never existed into their brains. He took my son at 3 and my daughter was 5. And by the time they were 10, that was the last time I saw my son. He was 10 years old, and my daughter was 12. She said to me something at a visit that, I remember when you did this. And I looked at her like, I don't know what you mean, because that never happened. That was never an experience. Well, I remember when you locked me in the basement, and I remember when so-and-so did such and such to me, and I'm like, that wasn't not your experience. But then it's very tough dynamic to tell your child what you remember is incorrect, because then you're disrespecting them. It was just heartbreaking. They were systematically told for the years that we had supervised visitation. Now, the supervised visitation was ordered because of false allegations that were later said unfounded, but the court never overturned the supervision. So for the years after he won custody, I still saw them just 1 hour a week.
So even if you can win in court,
exactly,
the fact that you were involved in all, so it's really, obviously it's a lose-lose as soon as they show up at your door.
Right, and I had the twins. I actually went to court in April of '98 and lost custody of those 2 children in that final hearing, and I was devastated. And that night, I got pregnant with the twins. I got pregnant with the twins. That's one of them.
You're so stupid.
But for me personally, it was a miracle. But it was also very difficult, because from that point on, I still had CPS had my oldest child, and they had already filed to terminate my parental rights on my oldest child, and then here I was pregnant with twins. I tried for about 4 months to just ignore it, but this is one of those situations that doesn't go away, and you can't ignore it. No matter how angry you are, no matter how much you want to just dig a hole and hide, that's not going to be you can't have a good outcome if you do that. So I realized, okay, I've got these twins, and they're coming in December. I've got to take care of myself, and I've got to take care of the situation. So at that point, I began to do what I had to do, jump through the hoops, give the appearance of cooperation to the CPS vulture that was at my door. And part of that was voluntarily signing over my parental rights on my oldest child. The day before Thanksgiving in '98, I signed them over. And the day I gave birth to the twins, that was the day we originally had a TPN, the termination hearing set. So even if I had wanted to go to court, it wouldn't have been possible for me to be there, and either way I would have lost. But ultimately, because I took the bull by the horns and said, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do to make this right, when they did go to court when the twins are 4 days old and file another dependency neglect, only because of the previous one, and they can do that. Even if you say you had something 20 years ago, they can pull up that stuff out of the file, and they can make you guilty or try to make you guilty based on all this old information. So they went to court with that, and I at that point said, no, I'm not admitting to this one. You guys are going to have the burden of proof here. And meanwhile, I compiled a list, and at that point, thankfully, I had a fairly good attorney who understood that I was not cooperating in any way, shape, or form. I was going to fight it. And we compiled a list of potential witnesses that were about 35 people, all in the professional realm, that had taken care of me during the pregnancy, all who said they would go to court and testify that I did not neglect or abuse my infants in utero or after birth. The lactation consultant said, I just hope you have to breastfeed them in court. Let's get that on the front page of the newspaper, a judge telling you can't breastfeed in public. She was raring for a fight. But in any case, so the court date was set out to March. In March, they ended up, a week before court, they actually gave in, and they called my attorney and they said, well, we're willing not to go to court with this, And I know that the city attorney told them, look, you don't have a case here. You didn't have a case before, and you got lucky, but you don't have a case now.
Well, yeah, I mean, you heard in Dawood's interview that even after the court ruled that they didn't have a case, the CPS worker persisted.
They still persist.
Yeah, so
they persisted in my case, and it was like we came to an agreement not to have a hearing, not for them to follow through with the court, but I had to agree to monitoring, or basically intermittent supervision by the CPS worker for a year. And because she could, she extended that to another 6 months before closing the case. And that included like dropping by my house to try to visit me when I am out of the house with the kids. My mother and I were having lunch, and she paged me on my pager. This was before I had a cell phone. I call her up, and she says, oh, well, I'm at your house right now, and I hear babies crying. I'm like, well, I don't know whose baby that is, because my babies are with me. And if you'd like to meet us here, you can see them. You know, and stuff like that. It's just they're still trying to make something out of nothing and bring out all this crap.
Just to interject here real quick, we are running out of time. Qualifications to be a CPS investigator can be as little as a high school diploma, so I don't see really any education. On another point, with parental rights, signing off parental rights, in my experience, I'm finding CPS is threatening women who have drug abuse history, that if they don't sign off their parental rights, the kid's going to go to foster care. If you do sign off with parental rights, they'll go to a more affluent family. So they're actually blackmailing them to sign off their parental rights so the child will have a better life, because they won't get to contact them anymore.
Right, and that's what happened to my oldest daughter. She was 10, and she was adopted by the people who had fostered her, who told us at the last visit that they wanted her to remember her family of origin. They left the state as soon as adoption was final, and refused contact with us since then. Now, granted...
Have you heard of a case where someone overturned the parental rights?
Not, and especially not if you sign off to, if you TPR voluntarily. I don't think that it is fightable. You can appeal a TPR, but it's very, very difficult. And here's the crux of the matter. When you are dealing with this, if you are in the throes of this problem right now, your biggest ally is going to be your own proactive stance. You say no if you know you can say no. But if you're facing a court case, you must document everything that happens. And you must, and this is one of the things that became the difference between the losses in '97 and the win in 2011, was that I insisted, my attorney wouldn't follow through with it. I said, I'm going to file a statement of fact. Because the statement that the court case that they prepared in 2010 included all the crap from the case files from 20 years ago. And that was their evidence, even though there was no current evidence. And that's the thing. A CPS is paid to find the worst of the worst, and they're going to create documentation that goes into court that includes everything that's horrible about you. And it's going to be lies. You know, sometimes it's going to be outright lies. And then you go in and you're in the hearing and you don't get a chance to speak for yourself. Sometimes some judges are even refusing parents the right to bring their own witnesses to court to testify.
Wow.
On the absence of time or anything. So here you're accused of what essentially is a crime, and you have absolutely no way to fight it, no recourse. You're assumed guilty rather than innocent. It's your job to prove you're not guilty, and sometimes you can't prove what doesn't exist. You know you're innocent, but you have nothing to show for it.
You know,
so
it's one thing to become.
Have to prove it.
It's one thing to become educated about your rights, and then it's quite another to actually have to perform that in court. I mean,
exactly.
I consider myself a very educated person in regards to my lawful rights, but still going into court is intimidating. It's stressful. It takes a lot of time, and especially when they target the poor, you know, you don't necessarily have a lot of time or money to spend, you know, like you said earlier, to actually go through that process, let alone successfully, you know, argue. A lot of people have logical faculties, but with all the pressure, it's very difficult to express that, and these people are like, they're paid to deceive. So
exactly, and they pay their minions to deceive. So this most recent case, they sent me to what was called a parenting evaluation, although the person that did the evaluation never saw me with my children. So he sat down like a therapist and essentially gave me, I had 2-hour session with him, 2-hour sessions. So there's lost wages, there's transportation costs to go. And he came back with a report that was essentially nothing more than a character assassination. And basically saying I was a troublemaker because I refused to open my door to CPS in the beginning, and I put my children at risk because I wouldn't open the door to the social worker.
Yeah, because you put them at risk because you resisted them and they might have to shoot.
Exactly. Yeah. And he sat there and told me I was wrong. I was patently wrong for doing so. The guardian ad litem was highly biased in our case, was actually in our favor because the judge was not impressed. So she went to court at one point and told the judge that I failed to cooperate because I was not home for her unannounced visit. Like I'm supposed to sit at home and wait. Yeah, I'm a single parent trying to support kids on my own. I have a job, people. Come on, It's asinine stuff like that.
It is asinine.
It's asinine. It's totally ludicrous.
The arrogance is, they don't even respect
and the arrogance
the Bill of Rights, human rights.
The other aspect I want to touch on really quickly is that I had my very, very best friend got involved with this one in the sense that she had talked to social services about me. And I went to her, and, at first I was very angry. You feel betrayed. You feel lost, And I said, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Why did you get involved with this? Why are you talking to social services about me? And she said, well, I thought they could help you. I thought they had resources. I thought they could give you like some type of job training program and help you improve your situation and help you get a better paying job. So she was fully under the impression that CPS is there to help. And I think that's what happens in the majority of things. These people, your neighbor next door, they see you struggling. They see your kids maybe unattended. They're going to pick up the phone and call CPS because they're under the mistaken impression that they are there to help. And what they don't understand is the fallout, the total reality. The reality is you're faced with a court case that you cannot defend. You have probably only a 15% chance of winning anything. Your children are going to go to foster care and really be abused or neglected, because none of those stats are shown. Nobody knows if foster care is more dangerous for children than them staying at home. The parents are going to be subjected to court-ordered services, court hearings, CPS appointments, unannounced visits. The list goes on. Some parents are subjected to court-ordered drug testing or alcohol abuse classes, even when there's no evidence that they are partaking of those things. Every parent must go to a parenting class, which is essentially nothing more than another indoctrination session to tell you how you're going to be a good citizen and teach your kids to follow the rules. You're going to be subjected to, I was subjected to this parenting evaluation. All my children were subjected to an evaluation. And then I was subjected to court-ordered therapy for 6 weeks that I lost 2 hours of wages to go take care of. So it essentially was costing me about $70 a week to do their court-ordered service. And the psychiatrist sat there and told me that I needed to get a date.
You need to get a date.
Yeah, essentially. I'm a single mother. I needed to go out fishing to get a date.
Ruth, this is such an immense issue. One thing I wanted to get to before we depart. Okay. Let's educate the people out there. You're at home, you hear a knock at the door, and there's CPS with a couple cops. What do you do?
Don't open your door.
Don't open your door.
Don't open your door. Here's my 15-year-old daughter. Come and say hi. This is Sarah.
Show him.
Sarah is beautiful. She's one of my my twins.
Scary.
Don't open your door.
You'll die.
Just say no. Okay. And this is, every citizen in this country has the right to refuse the entry of their private home and their vehicle, and the right to refuse an unwarranted search or seizure of their personal property, period, no matter what. Okay, so you got the worker at the door. She's brought the cops along for effect. basically.
Yeah.
She shows you the badge. She says, I'm here because we have to see your children. Okay, great. Let me get the kids. Step out onto the porch. Show her the kids. But do not, under any circumstances, allow that person to walk over the threshold into your home. Because once you do, you're going to open up a shitstorm. Invoke your right to say nothing. Please.
Right.
Please. That is part of the Constitution, right?
Just like the IRS commissioner.
The Fifth Amendment. You have the right to refuse to say anything. So they ask you these pointed questions, and oh man, they are schooled in how to ask you questions.
Yeah.
But okay, say you think they're there to help, right? They appear helpful on the outside, and they ask you personal questions. You know, like, okay, how's your housing situation? How's your work situation? How's your relationship going? Okay. And you may have some struggles in those areas, and you think it's a social worker. I can open up to this person. Do not, under any circumstances, give them your personal information, because they will do one of two things with it. They will twist it into something else. Okay, so I could say, yes, I am divorced now. I left my ex-husband because he was an alcoholic and he was abusive. Okay, that reality was 6 years ago. But they will go back to their office. They'll write a report that says that we are subjecting the children to an abusive spouse, even though the ex-spouse is in California and I'm in Virginia. The problem that exists is that they will take any one little thing that you say. They'll come into your house and they'll evaluate your housekeeping. They'll want to see your child's bedroom. They'll want to see your child alone. No, just say no.
Okay, so another good point is videotape the incident.
Yes, yes. Right. Protect yourself. Dawood did the right thing because he had a tape and it was right there in front of him and they saw it. And did you notice the body language of the police officers on that tape when he began to say, will you give me the law that says you can come here and see me and my child?
They were embarrassed.
They were embarrassed. The cops knew. The cops knew they were acting under color of law, which was unlawful by the federal law, and they knew that they could be in trouble for being there if that guy wanted to make a stink about it. He does have the right, and he has it on tape. He could take that video evidence and submit it with a federal color of law violation to the federal government and have those guys brought up on charges. They could lose their badge.
That's what people need to start doing if this is happening to them.
Yes, yes, we all need to say no. Just say no.
So you've said no, you haven't said anything, you haven't let them in the house.
Right.
What will be their next move? CPS's
their next move will usually be they'll either try to write you a letter. They'll probably send you some type of letter in the mail that, you know, we've had this, we're obligated to investigate it. They may send you, like in the state of Virginia, they have this little pat brochure that they send with that letter that's supposed to be your parent handbook that's educating you what CPS is about. Read that very carefully, because right within that it says that you have the right to refuse to cooperate. Okay? So you do not have to do what they tell you have to do just because their policy says it.
Yeah, we do live in a free will universe, and
exactly.
We've been indoctrinated not to exercise that free will, and that's what people need to start doing.
And now the problem exists is, number one, we have agencies that are acting totally out of control in this country. That if your kids are in public school or in daycare, if they really want your kids, they'll come and snatch them.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Recourse. You got no recourse.
In the meantime, if your child is in public school, they can go see your child.
Right. They can take your child out of class. Right. All they have to do, and sometimes they don't even have to show a badge. They can come and tell the person at school that they're with social services.
Even though
I told my school principal one time, I said, did you ever stop to think that this would be a really great way for pedophiles to abuse children? And she looked at me like I was crazy, and I said, well, you think about it. A guy shows up, says he's with social services, needs to take my kid out of class into a private room alone. You don't know them from Adam. They don't know my child from Adam, and yet you're giving them a private audience with my child on their word? Let's get real here.
Hey, they're with the government. They love you.
It could happen. They're with the government. Yeah, was it Ronald Reagan that said the scariest words are, I'm with the government and I'm here to help?
Yeah.
So just to let people know, you've said no. The recourse is they're going to try to send a letter. They can take your
They'll
child.
send a letter. They may
can
try
take
to
your
go to
child
court.
out of school. The CPS can investigate your neighbors.
Right. And they can talk to everybody that knows you. They can go to school. They can talk to your kids. They may try. The thing is, they cannot access is private records. Thanks to HIPAA and privacy, they can't go to a medical provider and get medical records about you and your children, although they will try. And if they are able to obtain that information unlawfully, that's another thing that under the federal law of Health Privacy Act, you can actually charge a social worker. If a social worker in your case has done that, I would seek the advice of, or go right to the ombudsman for HIPAA. There are federal laws that protect us as human beings, as citizens of this country, but CPS thinks their policies and the way that they act is above the law. And unfortunately, because people don't understand or they haven't spoken out and not enough has come out, there is no accountability. There's absolutely no accountability unless somebody gets on their horse and goes somewhere and talks to somebody. I just watched the video today. The Texas Sunset Commission is investigating. And so one family who was falsely accused, they lost their children for 367 days. They were in the care of CPS, and 2 of their children were physically, sexually molested while they were in foster care. They actually went before the Sunset Committee and testified. And a kind of a glimmer of hope, as it were, Senator Birdwell was there, Texas, and he asked this family, well, compensation, you said you spent your life savings to fight this. And he said, exactly how much was that? And she said, $127,000 it cost us to get our kids home. And he said, well, has anyone ever talked about the possibility of compensation? That in and of itself, I think if they're supposed to be working on a bill. If we can help them by writing to them, get that bill in the works in the state of Texas, which is a precedent for the nation. And it begins to cost the state money when CPS screws up. Because if they have to make compensation to a family that they have screwed over, then somebody somewhere is going to be starting to hold them accountable for their actions. Starting to say, look, you can't just falsely accuse people, waltz into their house, and take their children on false allegations.
Yeah, we got to try to hold them at least to a warrant. So let me ask you back to the case we were talking about. So you said no. They sent you a letter. They're trying to see your children at the school. Is basically CPS just going to hassle you until you just give them something?
They might. It just depends. But if they insist that they absolutely have to visit with you or see your children, you have the right to refuse a home visit, period, unless you are court ordered to do so. If they want to try to go to court and you know that they absolutely cannot find anything to take a case to court. They got one false allegation from anonymous so-and-so who might not even show up to testify in a hearing if they wanted him to. Then they're probably most likely not going to go to the gamut trying to get a court case. Dawood was an exception, and I think because they're targeting infants. This is a big time. Infants are the hottest commodity for this industry because, oh my God, how adoptable is a brand new beautiful baby, black or white? So yeah, and that's the thing that people also don't understand is throwing money at the foster care system so that they could adopt these kids quickly. When children are really victims of abuse and neglect and severe abuse and neglect, they don't bounce back. They don't make relationships easily. They have serious problems, sometimes physical problems. They're not easy to take care of.
Most of them become sociopaths.
They're very difficult. So what they decided to do, they switched it up a notch. They're going to actually target poor people. They're going to target single parents. They're going to target people who have beautiful, adoptable children. And they can find a reason to get those kids out of the family, out of the home. Because those are the adoptable ones. We know we can sell this kid quickly. We know this kid will appeal, and we can get some, and then we can get our bonuses. So they really do have a hidden agenda. If you are concerned about, like, if, okay, so they've come to your door and you've said, no, I can't open my door to you. Come out on the porch, I'll talk to you. Take your kids out on the porch, let them see. They saw the kids, everything, that's fine. If they go to the
daycare, as little as
daycare,
possible.
right, don't give them any information. Do not give them any information that you think, that anything that you know can be turned around to incriminate you. And they will. They will take every little piece of things you say to them and they'll turn it around to incriminate you. And they may even say, because you were not that talkative or social to them on your front porch, that you failed to cooperate. And they may go to court and try to make that a case, that you did not cooperate with them. If you are faced with a court case and they go in and they actually file against you, what they're going to do is file what's called a dependency and neglect case against you. And if you know that that they have nothing and they can gain nothing to prove that you have in any way abused or neglected your children, then you refuse to admit. It's as simple as that. I saw a comment online the other day. If you equate this in the criminal court, you, like, say you got a traffic ticket and you go to court for the traffic ticket and you go to fight the traffic ticket, but they sit there and they tell you the city attorney's going to say, okay, well, you can plead not guilty, you can plead no contest, or you can plead guilty, right? What many people don't understand is when they say no contest, which basically means I'm not going to fight, they are still pleading guilty.
Yep.
A no contest plea means you're guilty and you're admitting your guilt. So if you firmly believe that you are not guilty, you must stand on that and say, I am guilty of nothing. You have the burden of proof. And in every court in the land, even the juvenile court, they have the burden of proof. So you have to hold them accountable to prove what they think are the allegations against you. And at that point, once if it has gone to a court case and you're facing them, what will automatically happen? And this is the interesting aspect, is the hearing might be, like, initially adjudicated. They'll go, well, okay, so here we have a DNN. You want to set it out to trial. But meanwhile, what they're going to do is the court has an obligation in most states to instigate what's called a protective order. And I think Dawood spoke about that. They were going to court to get a protective order for the child in question because he was refusing their ability to see the child and make sure it was healthy, right? And that was basically a warrant that said the court now has jurisdiction over your child. The court can decide for the court or their minions, in this case CPS, can decide how your child is going to be taken care of because it's been questioned that you have the ability to do that yourself. So a protective order, then unfortunately, if you have a court order, you are obligated to comply with that, or you can face contempt of court charges. And so, like in my case, they instigated a protective order that said that they could come into my house whenever they wanted to see that my house was a healthy environment for my children. And they could go to school and daycare and talk to my kids whenever they wanted.
It's a complete disaster.
It is.
I think we only scratched the surface here.
Yes, and the
Ruth,
best way.
We're going to end the.
Ultimately, listen. Document. Write down every single thing that they say to you. Yeah. Stand there when you speak to the social worker with a pad and a pencil. Write it down. Tape it. And if you can get past it, now here's one little trick. Have a voice-activated recorder in the room, like sitting on the table in open view. But hold a pad and a pad and a pencil in your hand. When they come in and they want to talk to you, you say, "Oh, do you mind if I record this so I can be sure to understand everything that you need, or so I can be sure how to help you?" Use good language, okay? Act professionally, stay calm. But they will like agree to being recorded, thinking that you're writing it down, when in actuality you're creating a tape. They will be very much more careful if they know they're on tape.
Absolutely, yeah. They'll definitely.
They will be very much more careful. You have the right to refuse any service that they say you're supposed to have, unless it is court ordered. So Ruth, if you are not under court order, you can say, "No, I'm not going to therapy. I'm not taking my kids to therapy."
Ruth, give us your contact information again, because we're posing up tons of questions. We can't give you all the resolution and solutions. I encourage everyone to contact Ruth, contact us. We're going to continue to pursue this. We're going to continue to find real news here in Durham, North Carolina with the Bull City Bulletin. So, Ruth, give us your contact information so people who have questions can reach you.
If you're on Facebook, just please, you can go to Victims of Social Services Unite. You can message me through that page, or you can post on the page, and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. If you're not using Facebook, you can email me directly. It's r_golden, that's GOLDEN, 700@hotmail.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Or, you know, if you need help and you need someone to advocate for you, we do have a fairly good network of people who are advocates. Great information is available on Facebook and online from the American Family Rights Association, AFRA, AFRA, American Family Rights Association. Look up their webpage. You'll find tons of great information in there, and it does tell you exactly the steps to take to fight CPS. And they also have a help group online on Facebook, and they also have an information group. So like if you go to their group, it is a closed group, but you have to ask to join. But if you have an open CPS case right now and you need consultation support from someone who understands it, go to AFRA group and ask to join, and they will allow you in there, and you can ask your questions there. It is an open forum once you're on that, and there's about 2,500 people, I think, right now that are on there. Yeah, Eric, you know, you said it's a tragedy that I have about 1,300 fans right now, but ultimately I know that there are thousands of people who are victims of social services worldwide, and unfortunately, thanks to the way that Facebook disseminates posts unless you pay for promotion, my word's not getting out as much as it could. So anything you see on my page, please share it on your page. Let's make stuff go viral, okay? If it's great information and you liked it and you know other people want to see it, or you want other people to see it, make it go viral. It's up to us to make that information get out. So do the best you can.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for the interview, for the video. Everybody can go to bullcitybulletin.com. It's going to be posted on the article page with Ruth's introduction. We want to thank you once again for coming on, and come visit and listen in again.
Thanks, Ruth.
You, Eric. Thanks so much. It's been a privilege to participate in this. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks for your
Have
courage.
a great evening.
Bye-bye.